So I don't know about you guys, but I've been getting a lot more emails recently from banks showing off their interest rates in their savings accounts. Suddenly it's time for us all to save again after more than a decade of terrible rates, and it's no surprise really that we're now paying attention when you look at what investors have had to put up with. As you might already know, the stock market's had one of its worst years ever in 2022, and even if you stayed away from meme stocks and crypto with quite a good old-fashioned portfolio, you still had a terrible year, and in fact, it was the third worst year ever for a 60-40 investing portfolio. Ouch. So this then begs the question, in this new world we find ourselves in, do we save or do we invest? Or maybe do something else entirely? Let's weigh up the options. Just before we jump straight in and give an answer one way or the other, we need to just quickly understand how we've ended up where we are now. And also, we need to understand where interest comes from and why we might actually want to save in the first place. You see, it's a simple concept, isn't it? We're always told to save our money, and then in return, if we're good, we'll get given an interest rate from the person that we're saving it with. If we saw a 5% interest rate and we saved £1,000 for 1 year, we'd then end up with £1,050. Nice and simple. And if we look back in history, we've often had some pretty good rates of interest. Just take the UK for example. Here's the Bank of England's interest rates going back over 300 years. And this is key because this is what determines what you'll see from your own bank. If we look at recent history, we can see how rates have changed dramatically through the 1970s and the 80s before they went to almost zero after the global financial crash. And it's only in the last year when rates have finally moved from 0.25% to 3.5% at the time of the video. However, all of this information is almost useless unless we know one very important key critical bit of information, and I'm sure some of you are screaming it right now in your head. What about inflation? So that's the elephant in the room. He's behind me, isn't he? Anyway, before you make any decisions about what to do with your money, if your goal is to make money, you need to keep up with inflation so you don't lose money over time. It's all good saying you're getting 5% a year from a savings account, but if inflation's running at 10%, then your real rate of return is actually minus 5%. Let me show you what this has looked like with real data here in the UK. Here's the real return that you would have got each year from 1980 up until today if you'd saved £1,000 each year. Anytime the bar is positive, it means that you're actually making money. And anytime it falls below the line, it means inflation's winning. So as you can see, from the mid-1980s up until the great financial crash, things were pretty good for savers, and you could make money just by saving into a regular account with virtually no risk at all, something that we're going to touch on in just a moment. It's only recently over the past decade where it's made almost no sense to save at all, and especially most recently with inflation being so high that saving looks even worse. However, nothing makes any sense until we put it in context and work out what the alternatives are. Because investing hasn't exactly been smooth sailing either. In fact, as I mentioned in the intro, 2022 has just been one of the worst years for investors, with a fall of nearly 20% even for a well-diversified portfolio with bonds inside of it. So factor in inflation and you'd say that even with a negative return, saving was arguably the better thing to do in 2022 at least. If only we could have gone back to the end of 2021 and sold everything would have been better, right? So how do we actually decide whether we should be investing or saving at any given time? We don't know the future, we have no idea what interest rates are going to be, or what inflation might look like, and we definitely don't know who the Prime Minister is going to be next week. So personally, I think this comes down to two critical factors, time and risk. Let's tackle risk first. You see, as you know in life, nothing comes for free, and there's always a trade-off somewhere. If you want some interest on your money, you have to give up access here in order to get interest from a bank, for example. And that bank is only going to give you a good interest rate if they think they can make more money with your cash. By paying you out 4% a year in interest, they'll then maybe want to lend that money out on a mortgage or a loan at 5, 6, or even 7%. As just like you, they want to get something out of it too. Now remember that all of these rates are highly dependent on the base rate, that interest rate set by the central bank. So here in the UK, that's the Bank of England. In the US, that's the Federal Reserve. The base rate is effectively going to be the lowest amount of interest available to you at an almost risk-free rate. So for example, with a central bank rate at 3.5% right now in the UK, your bank can deposit their money and get 3.5% back for taking virtually no risk. I say almost no risk because anything could happen, but in reality, this is as close to guarantees as you'll get. So this means that if you're going to invest instead of saving, you're going to want to get a better return than 3.5% because, as we know, investing is a lot riskier than saving. In any given year, just as we've seen, we could lose a large chunk of our money, so we'll want a much better return for taking more risk. Makes a lot of sense, right? Now, when interest rates are low and saving rates are really low and our banks only offer us less than 1% return on our money, then things like investing in stocks look a lot more appealing, and we'd hope that even in a bad market over a few years, we could beat a return of 1%. And we know that over very long periods of time, the stock market's delivered around 9 to 10% per year, not taking into account inflation, but still it's beating out anything else we could have done with our cash. The issue though right now is that these saving rates are starting to look really attractive to the point where the risk and reward of investing isn't looking so good, and lots of newer investors especially are thinking that now is not the right time to invest because we could fall a lot further. Slight tangent, but I actually asked you all in a community post something that follows on from this point. I said, what kind of savings interest rate would you need to stop investing with everything else being the same in the world? Our bank just suddenly says, here you go, here's a set interest rate for 3 years. Here's the results now, and I think they're quite interesting. And it seems like a majority of you would be happy with about 8 to 10% or even just slightly under to finally throw in the towel for investing for at least a few years. Clearly you can see that most of you lean slightly lower and appreciate that without risk you can't expect to get rewarded massively. So that's more than 70% of you are somewhere between 6 and 10%. I think I'd definitely have a serious think if someone offered me 10% per year for the next 3 years risk-free, as that's the key point here, isn't it? Speaking of risk-free, if you're enjoying the video, please do me a huge favour, hit the like button, subscribe too, and why not leave a comment as well, especially if you're new. It really does help out small channels like mine get out to more people, and thank you so much for the support, it means a lot. Anyway, that's the key, isn't it? What level of risk are you willing to take, and what expectation do you have that the stock market can give you back enough returns to justify that risk? And that is the real burning question. And let's not forget that all of our views on risk are going to be individual to us. I know some of you are older than me by a decade or so, many about my age at 34, and some of you are younger with even less responsibilities. So what we expect as a rate of interest is always going to vary. Just finally on risk though, remember that high risk doesn't always mean high reward in the stock market. You don't have to throw everything into a single stock to go for high returns. And actually, there is a balance to be had where we can get really good returns for taking less risk using a really well diversified portfolio. Now, I won't spend any time on that one in this video, but you're welcome to check out my complete beginner's guide to investing after this if you're wondering what that might actually look like. For now though, let's talk about this second point which ties this whole debate together, and that is time. So here's the great thing about saving, but also its downside too. You know the rate you're going to get, nothing more, nothing less. It's set in stone and usually protected by some kind of law, especially like the UK, the US, or most developed countries have got some kind of protections for savers. After you deposit your cash, you leave it for a year or however long you've agreed to, and then you can get your interest. And right now, some rates are as high as 7% in the UK, which I've been seeing recently, which is almost unheard of. So get on that if you're looking for some decent rates. However, as good as that sounds, there's no upside with saving, whereas with investing, there's no limit to what you could get as a return in any given year. In fact, the market's giving you returns in the double digits many times, and sometimes even year after year. The big issue though all comes down to time. How much time can you invest for, and can you leave the money to work without touching it? Once you start to invest for longer periods of time over many years, history shows us that when you do start to increase the chances of making money as we go through the normal cycles of boom and bust, but keep investing no matter what happens. Now regular viewers would have seen this before, but this chart shows us how in the S&P 500, rolling returns get better and better the longer we invest. And even if we get the worst possible timing once we've reached the 15-year mark, we still come out with a profit. Now, it's still possible, as you can see, to do really well in the short term with investing. It's just that you also run the risk of downside as well. Whereas with saving, the only downside is the threat of inflation because you already know what you're going to get out the other end. There's nobody who can tell you the future of what might be the best in any given year, and also it all depends on your own level of risk, which, as you guessed it, is personal to you. Now, time's also our friend when it comes to compounding our returns, and it also works with savings too. Even getting 5% per year every year will add up over time as you start getting interest on top of the interest. Now, the good thing with investing as well, just like saving, is that you don't have to just make one decision for your whole life and be done with it. You can quite happily just invest or save each month and make a decision about it depending on your circumstances at the time. In fact, this leads us on to a bit of a conclusion really, as you're probably still thinking, okay, well, what's best to do? Save or invest? The reality is that you can quite easily do both or none at all. It really will come down to you. But if you want my 2 pence, I'd say it comes down to a couple of key points. Firstly, let's just address doing nothing because that's always an option. If you just keep hold of your cash and get no interest, so you're taking no risks, you won't lose money in cash terms, but you do lose money against inflation. So effectively, that's a guaranteed loss. So sorry everyone, but that's life. You need to get some risk to get some reward. Now saving, like we said, gives us guaranteed results, at least as close to that as we can get. And right now, we might be tempted with a 6 or 7% rate from some offers out there. However, the elephant in the room, as always, he is behind me again, isn't he? Anyway, inflation will always be the real enemy. So even with a savings rate like 7%, technically we're still losing money against the UK inflation rate, which is currently above 10% and not really set to get much better, at least for a while. Now investing, there's lots of things to be negative about at the moment. The world doesn't seem like a fun place, and you could do a video after video of all the problems in the global economy and the world. I know you all love a good doom and gloom stock market video with flames in the thumbnail and a shocked face, and I always keep them on a folder on my computer just in case. But the stock market isn't the economy, remember, and honestly, anything can happen. The world could be falling apart and you could still see the market rally 10%. It doesn't have to make sense. But like we said, there's always risk and the downsides can be pretty painful too. So here's the line I think, it's all down to time and risk. Saving's great if your time horizons are short and your risk tolerance is more conservative and maybe anything in between. Saving up for a house, keeping an emergency fund or even a holiday pot, anything that you need in the next couple of years and you want to access it, fill your boots with and try to get some decent rates, just take advantage of whatever's out there. Now investing on the other hand is a long-term game, so although there's no hard and fast rules, personally I'd say we really need to be talking at least 3 to 5 years, ideally a lot longer, to really say that we should be investing. But remember that that's just me talking, I'm no professional advisor, your situation's always going to be unique. But we do know from history at least that our best chance of beating inflation will be investing into some kind of asset in that long term. And there's only so many things that have beaten inflation over that time. In some years we might beat it just by saving, but a lot of the time we're going to need to invest. So this leaves us with that critical decision to make. Save, invest, do both, or do nothing. It's totally up to you. Now you know what the risks are, what timescales you need to look at, and why we're all of a sudden seeing better rates of interest than we've been seeing over the last 10 years. The key thing is to find out what works for you, what will let you sleep at night, and what won't get you in trouble with the other half. Just don't show them your crypto account, whatever you do. As I said earlier, if you're looking to get started investing, I've made a completely new guide for 2023, which you can find here on screen now, and that takes you through everything you need to know. Alternatively, here's my latest portfolio update where you can see what I'm invested in if you haven't already seen that video. And as always, leave a like on the way out, subscribe for more. Happy investing.